A compelling detective story, a cloak and dagger action, and a romantic drama, all these stories were taken from real life. The history of Kazakhstan is inseparable from the world history. Reflections on History, our version.
A trace of Turkic in the destiny of the Queen. Just 10 kilometers by car from the Stalin Museum in Gori, and walk up the path to the cave city that is on the bank of the mountain river Mtkvari, otherwise called the Kuda. By the way, this is a Turkic name. An ordinary tourist route, a quaint stone city, more precisely ancient ruins.Upletstsikhe, in translation from the Georgian, means the fortress of God. At the time of Queen Tamara, in this hall, a council of elders was assembled and they solved state issues. However, this is only a legend. According to others, Tamara did not hold any meetings here. If you follow the chronicles, she was only crowned in the city in 1178. And it happens thanks to the support of the militant Polovtzy. The Kipchak secrets of the Georgian tsarina. A woman queen in the history of Georgia was the only time, the first and the last. In the story of the defense of Tbilisi, Georgia had interests at that time. Indeed, the Kipchaks showed their loyalty here. He was an interesting personality, Kuda, who, with the father of the tsarina Tamara, George III, became commander-in-chief of the Georgian army. Chapter 1. The Tsar's Fate. It all began with a desire of her father, George III, to rule unchallenged. He got it right. Although George's grounds for the throne were controversial, he was not a direct successor, and in 1177, George's nephew, Demna, raised a revolt. There were great quarrels with George III, the father of Tamara, and he appropriated it. In fact, he was not the firstborn son. The state was threatened with civil war. A victory for Demna could lead to the disintegration of Georgia as a state. The Kipchaks helped save the country from chaos. They remained faithful to George, and with their support, he ruthlessly and quickly suppressed the revolt. He quickly gathered an army in Tbilisi with lightning speed and directed it against his enemies, and the Kuda helped him in it. He not only helped, he played a key role in defeating the rebels. A mysterious Kipchak called Kuda, or Kuda, was the right hand of the king, the commander-in-chief of the Georgian troops. To be the head of the Georgian army in a Christian country was a very responsible position, and it was, of course, very honorable. But even after the defeat of the rebels, keeping peace in the country was not easy. There were many enemies, but George did not have a successor. He had to crown his daughter and make her co-governess. At that time, she was only 13 years old, a woman on the throne, and so young. An amazing occurrence, not only for Georgia, but for the world. There was no one, and the father had only Tamara, and it was necessary to appoint someone to the post of Tsar. The king therefore appointed her. It was with the support of the Kipchaks that helped to implement this incredible plan. But George perfectly understood that this was the only correct decision and eliminated all who would prevent the accession of the princess to the throne. He approached those whom he considered to be loyal and handed out honorary posts. Thus, there were many Kipchaks in his entourage. Kuda, raised by his patrons, a faithful and kind knight who was the military minister from the Chronicle, History and Praise of the Crown. How did Kuda find himself in Georgia? History does not tell. According to some reports, he was a descendant of the same Kipchaks who were called by the crown primate of the Queen Tamara, the Georgian king David the Builder, to cope with Seljuk Turks, and allegedly was brought up at the court, and George knew him from childhood. By the way, according to some sources, Kuba was one of the tutors of the future Queen Tamara. The history of Georgia is connected with the steppe, which starts from the Altai Mountains and ends with the Caucasus. And in general, in the history of the Turkic people and Turkic tribes, the Caucasus has always played a special role.
Тюркских народов и тюркских племен Кавказ всегда играл особую роль.
By the end of the 12th century, the Kipchaks had already firmly established themselves in Georgia. Also, new Kipchak warriors regularly were arriving. In particular, with George III, a few tens of thousands of them were resettled, as the chronicler writes. The new Kipchak militia arrived, and Georgia was able to maintain its territorial integrity. The Polovtzy were settled in different regions of Georgia, part in Kartli, part in the northern Armenia, and Hereti, in the border zone, where their duties included strengthening and protecting the state border. The Polovtzy quickly assimilated. They accepted Christianity, the Georgian language, went on to a settled way of life, and gradually mixed with the local people. Mariam Lord Kipanidze, The History of Georgia. And the Kipchaks, as you know, have always been in favor if military support was required. So, largely thanks to the generalship of Kuba, George III managed to consolidate his power, and he didn't forget about his gratitude to the steppe warriors. Under George III, the father of Queen Tamara, was set such a duty, a Kipchak duty. In the register of posts, there were Mesahivchaks. Mesahivchaks are those who collected tax. The collected funds went for the maintenance of the Kipchak army that continued until the end of the 13th century. But in general, steppe warriors were inexpensive for the Georgian treasury as they were given land and pastures. Chapter 2. The Kipchaks at the court of Queen Tamara. The old streets of Tbilisi, narrow, winding, multi-stage staircases, small courtyards and cozy balconies. And this is Solol Laki. According to one version, the name of this region is of Turkic origin, from Su, water. Here once an aqueduct, which water was delivered to the gardens. But this is not the only toponym in Georgia with Turkic origin. The Turkic language at the court of Tamara, however, was not excluded. But this was not the speech of Central Asian Muslims who came to the Caucasus with the first Seljuk conquerors of the 11th century and settled near the very borders of Georgia. In the Tiflis court, other Turks were favored and honored, and they are the Kipchaks Polovtzy. Agatangel Krimsky from an essay on the history of Turkey. In the time of Queen Tamara, even a special term appeared for the new Kipchaks. This is to distinguish the former Kipchaks who had already lived on the shores of the Kura long ago in Georgia. They lived for a long time, and those who had moved there recently. Moreover, the Kipchaks at the court of the Queen did not only feel free, they occupied state positions. There is a legend, ostensibly, when the term of service came to an end for the Kipchak warrior, many of them wanted to return to their homeland. The tsarina collected the most beautiful girls from all over the country and sent them to the Kipchak army, allegedly saying these words: "Stay overnight. Let these beautiful girls give birth to heroes for Georgia." It's said that after that, many Kipchaks stayed forever. It's almost as if Turks always, wherever they arrived, they always supported the local religion and local culture. In 1184, George III died. Tamara became the sole ruler. Under the pressure of the Didebuls, noble Georgian feudal lords, she had to remove Kuba from the position of the commander-in-chief, the one who helped to keep her father on the throne and thanks to whom Tamara herself became queen. However, the historian writes that Kuba bore no ill feelings. Kuba, due to paralysis, had lost the use of his tongue, arm and leg. Queen Tamara was suggested by others to deprive him of all his dignity and to take away his property and wealth, but their intention remained in vain, since Tamara, being a good ruler, remembered love, service and education for Kuba, and therefore did not take anything from him except for his position. From the Chronicle, History and Praise of the Crown. It's unknown how the life of Kubasar went on. According to some sources, the queen provided him with money, and he returned to his native steppes. According to others, he was already married to a local woman and ended his days in Georgia. And as the chronicler writes, Tamara, until the day of her death, kept him in love with great respect. Chapter 3. Love and Power. The story of how the queen was given in marriage is also a Turkic trace. Tamara at that time was already slightly over 20, and in those times almost an old maid. She was not in a hurry to marry. They say the reason for this was her love for her childhood friend. But representatives of the Georgian nobility, the Didabulas, including her aunt Rusudan, found her another groom, the Russian Prince Yuri, the son of Andrei Bogolyubsky. And most likely this union was initiated by the Kipchak lobby. This marriage was more conducive to Aunt Rusudan and Ali Arslan, a Polovtzy courtier.
Тетка Тамары Русудан и Али Арслан, Половецкий, там царедворец.
Then one of the most influential figures of Tbilisi, Abu Hassan, spoke. I know the prince, the son of the great Russian Prince Andrei. He remained young after the death of his father and being persecuted by his uncle Savalat, left for another country, and now he's in the city of the Kipchak king, Sevenge. From the Chronicle, History and Praise of the Crown. A frightened boy was taken to the city of Soyunk at a very young age, which means that his Kipchak relatives are Nagashi, or relatives by their mother. Some clarification, the prince was Russian, not of blood, but his father, Andrei Bogolyubsky, was half Kipchak, and his mother also was of Kipchak origin. In addition to the Russian language, Kipchak was also his mother tongue. Most of his life, the future husband of Tamara spent in the camp of his Kipchak relatives, who maintained close ties with Georgia. He lived in the city of Soyunk. Soyunk-Su, there is such a river, and according to the version, it was situated in the site of the modern city of Grozny, a large city of Kipchaks, and he grew up there and got a half Kipchak education. Tamara did not want to marry. She said she needed to look for a prince. Is he so good? And she turned out right. Yuri was a bad husband. She was accused of drunkenness and depravity, and after 2.5 years, the queen divorced him and drove him out of the country. They had no children. And she said to him in the presence of all, although I was taught by the law of God that you cannot leave the first marriage bed, but with a man who will not keep his bed clean, one should not patiently remain. From the annals of the life of the Queen of Queens, Tamara. Yuri then, having collected the army, twice tried to seize the Georgian throne, but he failed, and the Queen Tamara soon married her childhood friend Sozlan. There is a version that he was of Turkic blood. However, most people called him Alanian, an Ossetian prince. But the Turkic trace in the history of Georgia was not interrupted even after Tamara's death. The daughter of Tamara, Rusudan, married a Turkic Seljuk prince. He adopted Christianity and took the throne and became known as Dmitri, and he ruled Georgia. Queen Tamara ruled Georgia for 3 decades, and she glorified her name over the centuries. Epilogue: the history of the glorification of the crown. The history of the glorification of the crown. The lion is recognizable by its claws and Tamara by her work. Who wants to know? Look at the cities, fortresses, and regions belonging to the sultans taken by her. The borders that have been doubled. From the Chronicle, the life of the Queen of the Queens, Tamara. She was a very good diplomat, and neighbors with whom she could have a good dialogue, she agreed and settled good relationships, and with whom it was impossible to have any dialogue, she fought. What was built here, monuments, basilicas, churches, 80% of it was built by her. They call the golden era of Georgia 2 periods, the time of the reign of David the Builder and the reign of Tamara. and both of them, according to Georgian sources, are connected with the presence of the Kipchaks.